Alright, hello, my name is Patrick. Today I'm going to be playing a game called Uniracers. It's a Super Nintendo game that was released in 1994. I guess the reason I'm going to be playing this game is I think it's just a really interesting example of a very simple premise that's been executed to a pretty high standard in terms of the amount of variation you can get with a pretty simple concept. In this game, it's a side-scrolling racing game in which you play as I guess, a personified unicycle against one other opponent. It could be a CPU or it could be another player locally, and it's like that's really it. There are some elements of tricks in there and some different strategies involved, but overall the game itself is pretty straightforward, and it's something that I think is worth mentioning overall. I'm sure some of it for me is just nostalgia. Maybe it's not as great as I think it is, but it's definitely a 90s game, but still something I think is worth noting as something that maybe not that necessarily that it was underappreciated or not worth mentioning, but I don't know. I just think it's a really well done game. It's fun, but it's also very simple. So basically, there are 4 circuits. You've got each circuit has about five races in it, and then multiple difficulty levels. So you have a bronze, silver, and gold difficulty level. So it's kind of like Mario Kart, except in this case you're side-scrolling. There's no real battle element, but you can do certain things to kind of get ahead of your other racers. So I'm just going to start with doing probably only going to do this circuit, but going to do the bronze races first. Just kind of give you an idea of what the game was about, and maybe while I'm doing this I'll explain what it is about it that I think is just worth noting. So this is probably the most simple level in the entire game. Really straightforward. Just to kind of, it's almost like a tutorial, I guess. It's a straight line. You just go. Throughout the race, you'll have checkpoints that'll notify you whether the opponent you're facing is ahead of you or behind you. Again, you can do tricks like this to get ahead. Every time you land a trick successfully, you move faster than your opponent. So again, that's the most simple race in the entire game. So it is just kind of meant to give you a taste of what's to come, but as you move forward, you'll see it gets a lot more complicated. Not necessarily in this circuit, but in other circuits it will. But even this one, if you're not careful, you can kind of lose track of what's happening. So whereas in the last race you could move in a single direction and just do tricks nonstop and not really have to worry about anything, here you do change directions, and because there's no kind of mini map or anything like that, you're ending up having to learn the track as you do it, and it creates a little bit of complication and a little bit of challenge in that, because you can't just do these tricks willy-nilly and get ahead of your opponent necessarily. As you're learning the track, you kind of learn when it's appropriate to do a trick and when it's not. So it's still similar to a tutorial level, I suppose, in that it's going to teach you that there's detrimental elements if you're doing things at the wrong time. But if you're able to overcome the challenge and time things correctly, then you're still going to be ahead. So I'm just going to quickly try and beat this as quick as possible. So again, for each circuit, there are 3 main challenges that you'll face. There's a bronze unicycle, there's a silver unicycle, and a gold unicycle. Obviously, each one is programmed with a different skill level. So obviously, in this case, bronze is the lowest of the 3. So it's a little bit easier than the other challenges you'll face. And it gives you some specs on lap times and whatnot. So those are your 2 races so far, and then this third level is actually trick based, and I think this is really interesting for a game of that time anyway, because I don't know, maybe it's just my experience, but I don't know any game that's quite like this from that period. So maybe it's a little bit of ahead of its time in some regard anyway. Obviously, if I wipe out the entire time, I'm not gonna beat anything, but Jesus, terrible. So yeah, in this case, you're not actually facing an opponent directly. You're trying to beat the score in the bottom right-hand corner to at least qualify. But every level like this would have a high score associated with it. You then have to beat out to get the best score and ultimately to beat the game fully. Oh god. So that's it. So obviously in this case I'm on the easiest setting, and I'm still doing pretty poor. One thing that I should note is the more you do a particular trick, the less the points will be worth over time. So if I just sit there and do twists every single time, you're not going to score as high as if you kind of vary up the tricks you're going to be doing. It's been a while since I've actually played this game, so I don't really remember how to do all the tricks, but yeah. So again, in this circuit, they're progressively increasing the difficulty of the tracks that you're doing, which is to be expected, but it also kind of illustrates what I think are some of the more interesting aspects of this game, because it's not necessarily, so yes, you have to learn the track well as you're going, but there's tricks, but then you also have to try and pay attention to different things, like in this case, it's the color of the track will change, and certain colors will alert you to dangers that are coming down the line. So in this case, you might have seen that there's an orange and yellow track that comes along with this kind of purple goo. If you hit the purple goo, it'll slow you down substantially. So if you can avoid it, then you're all like much better off. So you can't just run around and do tricks the whole time. Like this, because eventually if you're not careful you're going to run into that goo, and then it's going to stop whatever progress you've been making. I don't know if you can hear the audio, but in the background you can also hear the opponent doing their tricks, so it adds a degree of not anxiety, but you can kind of figure out what your opponent's been doing. So if they're constantly doing tricks, then it'll add that kind of pressure to you to make sure that you're also doing tricks to kind of keep ahead of them. Alright, so this last track is Monster. It's kind of, I guess, to round out the first circuit, it's going to be the most difficult. Again, there's laps in this case, and you'll be changing direction, but it adds yet another element, and that's this corkscrew. So corkscrew is an interesting challenge because you can't, if you're in the air or doing tricks at all when you're hitting this corkscrew, it ends up sending you back to the beginning of that portion. So once again, while you're going to want to be doing tricks as much as possible, it's limiting to where and when you can do them. And as you learn the track, you kind of, this is one of those ones where you have to be really careful about your timing. So it adds a new element of challenge to it. But yeah, I think this is ultimately what I'm trying to get at. Oh no. So I'm way behind because I've screwed up. Oh god. I'll have to do this again probably. So yeah, I guess this is kind of what I'm talking about when it's a really, really simple concept, just a 2D racer, side-scrolling. You could really only go two directions, but they've found a good way of like taking like a really basic concept, I guess, that's maybe a little bit silly, very 90s, I guess, over exaggerating and personifying inanimate objects and giving that kind of super multicolored flair. Oh god, no! I'm doing it again. Yeah, taking a really simple concept and then adding some simple challenges, but it makes it an addictive combination just because, yeah, I don't know, it's just really, I need to figure out how to explain this, but why? I guess the music in the game also I don't know, it's just really upbeat. Maybe a little bit stereotypical Super Nintendo music, but no, there's definitely some interesting elements. Not super catchy, but it's just enough to kind of keep your heartbeat going and keeps up with the fast pace of the gameplay. And obviously this is the first circuit, so the game does get more upbeat and fast paced as you go. I'm just not landing these tricks. Oh my god. Ah! And this is, again, something where like a little mini map would be, it would change the gameplay completely. You wouldn't be able to, or you would be able to kind of look ahead of where you're going and see what's coming down the pipe and make judgment calls before you hit a certain twist or turn or loop or what have you. So there we go. I barely won, but I won. And then you get this little kind of your stats again, and then your little celebration at the end. I shouldn't have got silver. That's weird. But regardless, that's kind of just a sample of Uniracers. It's a game that, yes, I have some nostalgia for. Just back in the day, I would play it a lot with my brother, and I know very few people that have ever played this game before, so that's, I guess, why I wanted to share this specific game. So yeah, that's Uniracers. My name is Pat. I'll see you later.